Lately, I've been starting to feel a little bad for Scott Bessent. This guy cannot catch a break. Every time you think he might get a moment to breathe, another crisis lands right on his desk. But before we dive into why he's having the worst few weeks of his career, let me ask you something. Does Scott Bessent inspire confidence in you, either as a citizen worried about the economy or as an investor keeping an eye on your money? Because honestly, the truth is shocking. What happened on August 7th wasn't just a bad day in the debt market. It was a warning shot that America's economic credibility is under serious threat. And Bessent? He's right in the middle of it, facing impossible choices while trying to explain how risky economic policies are somehow supposed to magically work out. Today, we're going to break it all down. Why the Treasury auction was disastrous, how the Trump administration's plans are already failing, and why this could signal a broader economic crisis that most Americans aren't prepared for. You're about to see just how fragile things really are and what it could mean for your money, your savings, and the future of the U.S. economy. Scott Bessent has dealt with market volatility before, but nothing quite like this. As Treasury Secretary, his job is to keep the government funded and investors confident. But last week, both tasks became nearly impossible. The August 7th Treasury auction, one of the most important tools for raising government cash, was supposed to go smoothly. Instead, it turned into a flashing red warning sign. The government was trying to sell $42 billion in 10-year notes, but investor demand fell short, way short. The bid-to-cover ratio, which measures how many bids come in for each dollar of debt offered, dropped to levels we haven't seen in years. It was a clear signal. Investors are growing uneasy about the U.S. government's finances. Bessent was left scrambling, issuing statements about strong fundamentals and market adjustments. While behind the scenes, Treasury staffers were looking at the numbers and realizing this wasn't just a bad auction. It was a crisis of confidence. And confidence is the most valuable currency in global finance. Once it starts slipping, everything gets harder and more expensive. A Treasury auction works like this. The government announces how much it needs to borrow, investors bid on the bonds, and the interest rate is set by demand. Usually, the U.S. can count on strong bidding because treasuries are considered one of the safest investments in the world. But this time, foreign buyers were scarce. Japan, one of our biggest creditors, has been cutting back on U.S. debt purchases to support its own currency. China, locked in a trade war with the Trump administration, has been quietly reducing its holdings for months. Even domestic buyers, big banks and pension funds, were hesitant, demanding higher yields to cover what they see as growing risk. The result? The U.S. had to offer significantly higher interest rates to get the bonds sold. That means the government's borrowing costs just went up, which will only make the national debt problem worse. It's like maxing out your credit card, then getting hit with a bigger interest bill every month. Eventually, something breaks. The deeper issue is that this auction failure didn't happen in a vacuum. It's the direct result of the Trump administration's economic strategy. The White House has been betting heavily on a mix of massive tax cuts, protectionist trade policies, and aggressive spending. The idea is that this will spark enough growth to pay for itself. But reality isn't cooperating. The tax cuts have boosted corporate profits but haven't generated the surge in economic activity the administration promised. Tariffs have disrupted supply chains and driven up costs for U.S. manufacturers, and government spending keeps climbing, especially on defense and infrastructure projects designed more for political appeal than long-term fiscal health. Foreign investors see the writing on the wall. They're asking themselves, if the U.S. is running huge deficits in good economic times, what happens in a downturn? The August 7th auction gave them an early answer, and it's not reassuring. This isn't just about one bad auction. It's a symptom of a deeper erosion in the world's trust in the U.S. economy. For decades, America's financial system has relied on the exorbitant privilege of issuing the world's reserve currency. That status meant we could borrow cheaply, even when our debt levels were high. But reserve currency status isn't permanent. It's earned through consistent stability, strong institutions, and predictable policy. The Trump administration's erratic trade moves, ballooning deficits, and political brinksmanship over the debt ceiling are all chipping away at that reputation. If this erosion continues, the U.S. could face a dangerous cycle, higher borrowing costs leading to bigger deficits, which lead to even higher costs. In extreme cases, countries have lost reserve currency status altogether, something that once seemed unthinkable for America. but now feels alarmingly possible to some economists. Publicly, the administration insists everything is fine. Scott Bessent has been careful in his language, talking about short-term volatility and strong underlying demand despite the clear evidence to the contrary. Trump himself has gone further, claiming the U.S. economy is the strongest in history and that any weakness is the fault of globalist traders trying to undermine him. Behind the scenes, though, there's real concern. Treasury officials are reportedly debating whether to scale back the size of future auctions to avoid another public embarrassment. There's also quiet outreach to major foreign creditors, trying to reassure them that U.S. debt is still a safe bet. But here's the problem. Markets aren't swayed by political spin for long. Investors care about math, not slogans. And the math right now shows a government spending far more than it's taking in, with no credible plan to close the gap. Beyond the numbers, there's a theory problem. The Trump administration didn't just make bold policy moves. They were built on economic models that many mainstream economists had already criticized as outdated or flawed. One key figure here is Stephen Myron, who wrote a research paper in 2024 proposing that the U.S. could structure much of its economic policy around tariffs. Myron's model relied heavily on the Triffin dilemma, a concept that explains how the U.S., as the issuer of the global reserve currency, must run trade deficits to supply dollars to the world. According to Myron, tariffs could help balance trade and leverage the U.S.'s dollar dominance. On paper, it sounded plausible, but it relied on outdated assumptions. Myron's model assumed currency depreciation abroad would neutralize the negative effects of tariffs. That assumption was reasonable under the gold standard, which ended in 1971, but it no longer applies in a world of floating exchange rates and highly mobile global capital. Essentially, Trump surrounded himself with yes-men who accepted a theoretical model that had long ceased to reflect reality. The August 7th Treasury auction proved just how dangerous this approach was. Every economic plan built on trust me logic, tax cuts will pay for themselves, tariffs will fix trade, everything will work out, was exposed as fragile. Investors aren't buying the theory, and the market reaction is a clear signal that confidence in U.S. economic leadership is weakening. What we've seen is more than just numbers and charts. It's a warning. The August 7th Treasury auction, failing tariffs, and outdated economic theories all paint a picture of an economy under serious strain. Ordinary Americans are already feeling the pinch through rising prices and shrinking purchasing power. At the same time, confidence in the U.S. government's ability to manage its finances is eroding, both at home and abroad. Scott Bessent's reluctance to step into the spotlight makes sense. The challenges ahead aren't just difficult, they're unprecedented. Inflation, stagnating wages, a ballooning federal deficit, and a faltering policy framework create a perfect storm for economic instability. Even traditional Federal Reserve tools may be powerless to fully address what's coming. For investors, citizens, and policymakers alike, the lesson is clear. The fundamentals of the U.S. economy are being tested, and what happens next could reshape financial markets, trade relationships, and everyday life in ways that few predicted. Understanding these dynamics now is critical because the policies and decisions made today will echo for decades. For the Midas Touch Network, I'm Max from UNFR. You can find more analysis on YouTube and Blue Sky at UNFR, and don't forget to sign up for our free weekly newsletter at unfr.com. For deeper dives, ad-free content, and daily market recaps, Midas Plus on Substack is the place to go. The takeaway? This isn't just a bad day in the debt market. It's a wake-up call. And the question we all need to ask ourselves is, are we prepared for what comes next?